Well, the last comment I would agree with, and I think that's the answer to your question. The rule of law should prevail in international relations. It's quite clear it was violated radically in both first by Iraq, then by us in the Middle East. It's been violated radically by Indonesia and all their supporters, which include the United States, Australia, Holland, Canada, England, Sweden. We can go on and on. It's a very ugly list. And the right answer is, I think, simply to follow the rule of law. That is, to allow the people of East Timor the right of self-determination, which they certainly merit. And that could easily happen. It could happen if the West changes its tune. In other words, instead of joining in with Australia in robbing Timorese oil, as about a dozen oil companies are now doing from around the world, from Japan to the West, what we should do is change our policy 180 degrees, stop military aid, stop providing civilizing training to Indonesian officers, as we've been doing since we told them how to carry out the coup of 1965, and insist that we certainly have plenty of economic clout to insist that Indonesia permit the right of self-determination to be exercised. It's not all that difficult.
Yes, please. One thing I would add to that, an argument often used by the State Department and also by many Democrats in Washington, is that the U.S. should not cut off its military aid to Indonesia because that aid gives the U.S. leverage to put pressure on Indonesia to improve human rights. Now, this is an interesting concept if you explore it. Imagine applying this concept to domestic criminal law. You have someone, say, a Ted Bundy who goes out and commits a mass murder. You apprehend him. You say, we're very upset with your human rights record. We have no choice but to apply leverage. Here's a pistol. And if you do it again, your aid relationship with us may be endangered. He does it again. You catch him again. You say, well, no more Mr. Nice Guy. We have no choice but to ratchet up the leverage. Here is an automatic weapon. You better not do it again, and so on. Now, in fact, that is not real. Even that does not really do justice to the nature of the relationship, because it's not as if the U.S. is applying that kind of pressure against Indonesia. If the leverage idea is truly the idea that informs the dispensation of military aid, why wasn't it tried with, say, Castro? The Soviet Union, Libya, approach Gaddafi, offer him some weapons in order to establish human rights leverage. I mean, the idea is an absurdity. It's a great reach, but it's that kind of logic and also just gross distortions of history that are used by. I mean, one thing Mr. Dinger said I agree with when he talked about a bipartisan policy over the years. That has been true. The Carter administration is in its way just as complicit as the Ford administration, and many Democrats in Congress at times have been backers of this over the years. There isn't really time now to go in detail through the State Department version of history in East Timor, but suffice to say it is completely inaccurate in every single respect. I would refer you for a more accurate account to the actual cables that were written by the CIA, by the DIA, and by the State Department during the 1974-75 period. There are hundreds of pages of them. They were leaked and published in Australia, and they establish quite a few key facts. First, the political spectrum in East Timor. There were two real parties in East Timor after the Portuguese started pulling out. Fretilin, a left party, UDT, a right party, both wanted eventual independence. The group that wanted integration with Indonesia was a wholesale creation of Indonesian intelligence. In the words of the CIA, Apodeti, it had just a couple dozen members. After Suharto's generals urged him to invade Timor immediately and he wanted to hold off, Indonesia started a covert operation instead, which included sending commando teams across the border, bombing, shelling from the sea, bombing from the air, various disruptive acts within Dili and so on. That failed to bring down the government, so they had to invade. The idea that they invaded because of a Marxist threat is also a complete nonsense. If you look at the cables, you will see that. At one point, in the summer of 1975, UDT, the right, the more conservative party, was on the verge of staging a coup. They sent their leadership to Jakarta, where they met with the Indonesian intelligence chiefs. The Indonesian intelligence people told them that, look, one thing you cannot contemplate is independence. If you try to set up a conservative UDT government and declare independence for East Timor, we will invade. You can talk to the UDT leadership. They will tell you this. It's all there documented in the record. It didn't matter to Indonesia this would be a conservative government. What mattered to them was that this would be an independent government. And finally, in the final months leading up to the invasion, Fretilin, which by that time had become the government after a brief civil war in which, according by the DIA estimate, about 400 people were killed, Fretilin had already offered to Indonesia, first, that they have a joint East Timor-Indonesia border patrol along the frontier with Western Timor. Second, that Indonesia train East Timorese military and diplomatic personnel. Third, that East Timor be allowed to join ASEAN, the military alliance. East Timor was saying to Indonesia, we want complete, we don't want to give even the inkling of any kind of threat to you. They were offering everything. And it was because East Timor was not collapsing internally that they had to invade, and they were sitting there waiting at the airport for Ford and Kissinger to give the final nod and give them permission to violate U.S. law. They gave that nod. The U.S. responded by doubling the aid, and the rest is genocide.
Mr. Dinger, would you care to reply to the questions asking, in the post-Kuwait world and post-collapse of evil empire world, why should not the United States change its tune dramatically and pressure for some form of self-determination?
I'll speak about East Timor. It's our judgment in the State Department that the basic facts remain the same in the post-Cold War world as they were in 1975-76, that Indonesia is in place, that it will not leave on its own, and that the world is not prepared to push it out, whether or not the United States is prepared to push it out. We also believe that it's useful for many reasons, including our human rights dialogue, to maintain a decent relationship with Indonesia. And so we have concluded that it would not be useful for us, it would not be useful for the East Timorese in the end. If we pushed on this issue, it would not change anything.
Yes?
Why wouldn't it change anything? I don't understand how we can support a military dictatorship that basically has been involved in human rights abuses, not only in East Timor, but in Aceh and Irian Jaya and throughout so much of Asia. And how can we reward that with sending additional military aid and M16s that are used to kill these people? I don't see how that supports our human rights dialogue. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, well, where to begin? Our military assistance to Indonesia, contrary to Mr. Nairn's statement, for this year is entirely military education and training.
Works very well.
It's interesting to note that the United Nations human rights official who was in Dili at the time of the November 12th massacre and who was looking into human rights in East Timor told us thereafter that he thought one of the most useful things that could be done to improve the human rights record of the Indonesian military is to greatly increase foreign training for them. In that international exposure helps. We think that may be the case as well. And in recent years, in fact just recently, on a broad scale, not just Indonesia specific, the United States has expanded the human rights, the formal human rights component of its military education and training program, and we hope that will help more than has been the case in the past.
Okay, then how do you respond to the claims of Asia Watch's executive director, Sidney Jones, and Amnesty International, and the Australian journalist that Professor Chomsky cited, who have been arguing that post-massacre, since the massacre, that the human rights abuses in East Timor have gotten worse? I mean, how...
I'm sure it's a frustration to all of us that we don't agree on the facts. But we don't. We go to East Timor relatively often. I wish Amnesty International could go there relatively often, but they